Hello, Professor Kentley here. Welcome back to Advanced Composition. And in this and following videos, I'm going to talk about some grammar and style issues. In this video, I'm going to start with the section on grammatical agreements that is in the chapter of the book on style, wording, and grammar issues. The first section is grammatical agreement, and then I will also talk about punctuation and commas later. So I'm going to go over some of the more interesting parts of this section on grammatical agreement. Some I will skip. Here the point is there is actually variation in subject-verb agreement. It's not always according to the strict rules you were taught. There are differences between colloquial and formal English, between different nuances of meaning, and between American English versus British English, or more generally Commonwealth English, British, Australian, New Zealand English versus North American English. Let's first look at coordinate subjects with or, things like that. I think that construction or weather is going, are going to delay our travel time. To be, both sound okay. Both sound okay to me. Is going, because it's or. X or Y is more, it's more formal, but in spoken English it's common to say are, kind of put them together like a compound subject. Construction slowdown plus the bad weather has or have made for a weak market. Either one, you could treat plus as a preposition and construction slowdown is the subject. Thus the construction slowdown has made for a weak market. Or you can treat plus as sort of like and it could be have made for a weak market. Collective nouns, this is where you see a big difference between North American versus Commonwealth English. So I know that the government are letting our troops down. That might sound funny to North Americans, especially Americans. It sure did to me when I first started listening to BBC and they talk like this. Like, the government is. But it's a collective noun. So it's an entity like government that actually consists of a group of people. It's made of a group of people. So government, team, band, committee, family, are. In Commonwealth English, there often are. So in American English, the government is. In British, the government are. So for the government has become. In American English, the government have become in British. Or 5, the Bournemouth Borough Council were not prepared, like a city council were not prepared because it's a group of people who are running the city or area. 6, the team is or are, depending on whether you're American or British. Team is playing, the team are playing. Both are fine. The band is popular, are popular. Committee is meeting, are meeting. The United States is sending, are sending. The family is planning, are planning. Now, the next one, data, it kind of depends on style. Not so much British or American. In common English, everyday English, people say the data is conclusive. But in academic and scientific English, we usually say are. And that's kind of a way to tell if a person has been to graduate school, especially in science or social sciences. They will say the data are, because data is a Latin plural. Datum is Latin singular. Data, plural, a bunch of group of information, data. So academic people will say the data are conclusive. Scientists will say the data are conclusive, unless they've learned how to consciously switch to colloquial style when they're talking to the public. Both are fine. It's just that data are is more preferred in formal academic writing. Now you can have a difference between a subject that's more factual or conceptual. So many cars in the road mean many traffic accidents, where the subject is many cars. It's kind of a factual, the literal subject, many cars, mean many traffic accidents. But especially in more informal English, or in the news even, many cars in the road can be more of a conceptual subject. The concept, the idea of many cars being on the road means many traffic accidents, and that is okay. It's okay to say that. High production costs prevent reasonable consumer prices, or the situation of high production costs high production costs prevent reasonable consumer prices. Prevents reasonable consumer prices. Both are okay, depending on whether you mean literally the subject, high production costs, or the condition or situation. This condition, high production costs, prevents reasonable consumer prices. Okay, we go to the next. I'll go down a couple of sections. In indefinite pronouns, item 29. Everyone is required to show their identification. That might sound incorrect to you, but it's normal, especially in modern English, and it's become increasingly common, increasingly accepted in more professional and even academic writing to avoid gender bias. You could say his, her, and I don't mind that. I'm used to that. People in my generation who are in professional and academic fields are used to saying his, her. That's fine. But some people find that a little awkward, and it's easier to say there. That's actually very common. It has been common in colloquial English for a long time for everyone there, because it's gender neutral. You avoid saying his, which would be gender biased. The group wants to publicize their views. Everyone has their failings, their own money. And increasingly in academic English, it's now common to say, the participant, if you're talking about a particular participant in a psychology study. And the style in psychology journals now allows this, like the participant reported that their vision was impaired. Okay. And that's gender neutral. You could say his, her, but that sounds weird because you're talking about one person, a particular person. So it is actually increasingly common and accepted to say, like, the participant reported that their vision, it avoids gender bias where you don't want to identify the gender or it's not relevant. Next section deals with partitive, like none is, none of something. So the technical term for that, like each of, none of something is partitive. That's a technical term. So for example, he ate all of his peas. None are left on his plate. And that's actually common colloquial English. Technically, the rule would say none is left. That sounds too formal, and I wouldn't say that. That sounds really hyper formal or snobbish. In academic writing, you could say none, and we'll see some examples. Each of the students is supposed to bring or are supposed to bring. Technically, each of the students is supposed to bring, and it might be okay to say that in formal English in writing. But in spoken English, that sounds weird. Each of the students are, because it's actually a plural subject. I mean, grammatically it's singular, but logically it's plural. Logically it's a plural subject. So none of the students is, that's a very formal written style. None of the students are going to go. That's more natural, more spoken style. None of the book is reproducible without permission. Okay, that sounds okay because none meaning like no sections, none. Okay, and it's one book. Okay, that sounds fine. The next one, none of them were in court. Now, technically, none of them was in court, but none of them were in court is kind of what you would normally read in a newspaper or here in spoken English. Now, let's talk about commas. You like commas, right? I've got a section in the book about commas, and particularly the serial comma versus the Oxford comma, because some people actually debate comma style and format. Some people have arguments about this, and I think it's a little silly to argue about it. Okay, we have what's called the serial comma. So, for example, we sell books, videos, and magazines, and there's no comma before and. It's not necessary. It's fine. It's clear. But there are some people who insist on the Oxford comma. According to an Oxford style guide, we sell books, comma, videos, comma, and magazines. So comma before and. Do you need that? No, I don't think so, but some people insist on it. Why? Well, there are cases where it does make a difference in meaning. So let's look at the example here. I loved my parents, Lady Gaga, and Humpty Dumpty. Now that's confusing. Do you mean that your parents are Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty? Or are these three separate things? And so in this case, the Oxford comma would make sense. It would be more clear. It would be clearer. I love my parents and Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty, the story. Okay, so of course, there are occasionally situations where you do need the Oxford comma for clarity to avoid confusion. Yeah, that's fine. I have no problem with that. When it's unclear, when it's potentially ambiguous or confusing, sure, I think you should use the Oxford comma. But do you need to say, well, you should be consistent and always use it? Like we sell books, comma, videos, comma, in magazines? I don't think so. It's if you want to, fine. I don't care. But I don't think you should argue that you need an Oxford comma here. It's clear enough. So in a lot of the examples here in my book, we have examples where the serial comma is totally fine. My favorite cheeses are Gouda, Havarti, and Brie. It's fine. It's clear. I like to make apple, raspberry, and blueberry and peach pies for the festival. Okay, that's a little confusing. I might want to put a comma after blueberry. So I like to make apple, comma, raspberry and blueberry, comma, and peach pies. Okay, there an Oxford comma would be helpful to avoid confusion. Next one, I talk with my boss, Chris, and my best friend. So I think it's probably clear that these are three people. Your boss is not Chris and your best friend. But if that were the case, that you need to make it clear that these are three distinct people. If somebody doesn't know your boss, or doesn't know who Chris is, okay, it might be clearer to put in the Oxford comma. Go pick up John, a magician and a guitarist. So is John a magician and a guitarist? Well, it depends on the context. If you know already who John is and that he's not a magician or a guitarist, but that these are three people, then fine, the serial comma is okay. But if you need to clarify for somebody, you could use the Oxford comma. In many of these cases, though, the Oxford comma is not really necessary. Now we get to 7, you get these long phrases. And so Sean was waiting for Kurt to pick up food for dinner. He scraped paint off the door frame, alphabetized his book by main character's first name. While Sean was waiting for Kurt to pick up food for dinner, he scraped paint off the door frame, alphabetized his books by main character's first name, and successfully startled the neighbor's dog twice. These are 3 different events. However, these are kind of long phrases, so just for readability, it would be better to put in an Oxford comma. It's just easier to read. You don't have to go back and reread. What was that? So in some of these cases, it would make it clearer to use an Oxford comma. Amanda found herself in the Winnebago with her ex-boyfriend, an herbalist, and a pet detective. Is her ex-boyfriend an herbalist and a pet detective? Well, to make it clear, you could put in an Oxford comma, and that's clearer. Some examples where it really makes a difference. The example earlier, I love my parents, Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty. Or this book is dedicated to my parents, Carl Sagan, and God. Carl Sagan, the famous scientist. So do you mean that your parents are Carl Sagan and God? Okay, here an Oxford comma would be better. The highlights of this global tour include encounters with Nelson Mandela, an 800-year-old demigod, and a mushroom collector. So do you mean that Mandela is a demigod and a mushroom collector, or 3 different people? Okay, there an Oxford comma would certainly help. We included the drug dealers, JFK and Stalin. Do you mean that JFK and Stalin were drug dealers? It might help to clarify with an Oxford comma. So many times you don't really need it. If you're not sure, just to be clear, go ahead and put it in. But especially in cases where it might be confusing to the reader, sure, put it in. If it's not ambiguous, if there's no problem, okay, like in we sell books, videos, and magazines, there's no problem there. It's up to you. I don't use it unless it's really, really necessary myself. Okay, I think that's enough for commas. One final thing, a little bit later in the book. Oh yeah, it's way down here on page 183, colons and semicolons. So colons and semicolons. A colon is kind of get your attention. Think about it in speaking, you would have like a voice raise with a colon. There's something, so number 2, there's something that graduate students simply cannot live without. Coffee. So a little voice rise, it kind of gets your attention. I'm about to, finish the sentence. And that's what colons are for, basically. They're sort of an attention getter, sort of like a voice rise and a little pause to get your attention. The semicolons, they're sort of, they can be like combining 2 separate clauses, could be independent sentences, but you're joining them together to indicate that they are closely related. The tissue was cut into 0.1 millimeter strips, semicolon. The slices were then examined for the effects of drugs on the neural tissues. That means 2 phrases are closely related somehow. And it flows better sometimes for reporting details, for example, in academic writing. Okay. Otherwise, if you're listing long phrases, a semicolon can be used as sort of a super comma, between long phrases, like the tissue was cut into 1 millimeter strips, the slices were examined for the effects of the drugs in neural tissues, and then the tissues were tested for the presence of such and such. Okay, you can combine several things together with semicolons, sort of like super commas. All right, that's enough for punctuation. I'll maybe you can search my website. I think I have something on my website on punctuation, especially semicolons, if you need more to look up more on semicolons. So that's it for now. In the next video, I'll talk more about grammar and style stuff. So until then, I'll see you later. Goodbye.